CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories, a focus on fossil fuels and how to ditch them. Day 4 of the UN Climate Conference looks at accelerating the transition to clean energy.
Courting China's consumers, the world's largest import fair opens in Shanghai as thousands of global companies show off their wares.
The UK keeps interest rates on hold over fears of a cost of living crisis.
And Britain's boat returns as key talks take place in Paris to try and resolve the fishing rights dispute between the UK and France. The COP26 Climate Summit has so far seen pledges on deforestation, methane emissions and green commitments.
On day 4, leaders and delegates are getting into some more tough bargaining on how nations cut fossil fuels and transition to clean energy sources. Andrew Wilson has the latest from Glasgow.
The UK hosts have ticked another box. First trees, then cash and now coal. Nearly 40 countries have joined a group pledge to tackle and end their reliance on the dirtiest greenhouse fuel. The new members are significant, among others Poland, Vietnam, Chile and Indonesia. The US, Australia, China and India have yet to sign up.
Today, I think we can say that the end of coal is in sight. The progress that we've seen over the past 2 years would have seemed like a lofty ambition when we took on the COP presidency back in 2019. Who would have thought back then that today we're able to say that we're choking off international coal financing, or that we would see a shift away from domestic coal power?
Countries like Indonesia and Vietnam will be hard pushed to make such an early transition. There'll be a considerable cost.
Okay, if we want to deliver climate change commitment in a credible way, let's talk about money. Let's talk about plan. Let's talk about the consequence.
And that's where the technical teams here in Glasgow justify their existence, arguing with each other, crunching the numbers, horse trading with their economies, pushing back against reluctance. If cash is a problem, we'll find some more. If targets are an issue, we'll conjure up something new. COP26 is all about creating a brand new framework, way more ambitious than Paris, but still feasible enough to keep everyone around the table. The Americans, while still avoiding a coal commitment, are selling optimism.
It's unheard of that we actually got every country to agree that now 1.5 is the challenge, not just well below 2 degrees. So that's enormous progress, folks, but obviously if we have 65% in, we have 35% still out. And we can't do it without that 35%.
There have been questions also about the private sector pledge on funding. How, some are asking, when the UN Special Envoy can talk about trillions of dollars, is it so hard to raise $100 billion to support the developing world?
We do not need more carbon.
And as if to add to the urgency, new data suggests that greenhouse emissions, mostly from coal, are up 5% on last year. Nevertheless, the step forward on coal will be hard to reverse. As COP26 lurches on, the momentum remains broadly positive. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Glasgow.
And let's go live now to Glasgow and Juliet Mann. Juliet, China's top climate delegate Xie Zhenhua met with his US counterpart John Kerry today. Any readout from that?
They've been talking about the climate. They have indeed met. And you know what? It's the latest in a series of background talks and meetings that they've been having over the last year. And these talks, they could eventually ease tensions on trade. But so far, what we've heard from previous discussions is that they've been candid, they've been honest, they've been in-depth, they've also been quite pragmatic. No actual agreements have come out of them so far, but what's more important is it sets a tone and it sends a message out, a signal to the markets and beyond that both China and the United States are working on their working relationship after really what was quite a bumpy few years under Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. And today's focus on the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. Some of the bigger coal users, though, not signing up to new commitments. How are people receiving that there?
Well, you heard Andrew Wilson talk through it all in his report there. Some really big names missing: United States, China, India, Australia. And also they're saying, look, you've also shifted the goalposts somewhat. We were expecting you to end coal by 2030, but now you're saying in the 2030s, maybe even in the 2040s. You can't get away from the good news here. I mean, 23 of those 40 countries who've signed up to the pact, this is the first time they've made a commitment to end coal. And these are countries like Vietnam, like Indonesia, like Poland, big coal sectors in all of these countries. So it is significant. The thing is, though, that these commitments are non-binding. So some are asking, well, where's that stick to force countries to do it? And of course, all these plans are probably going to need even more international financing. We know how tricky it's been coming up with all of that. Well, one company who has switched 100% away from coal to renewables is Scottish Power. It's the first and it's one of the fully integrated energy companies in the UK. And the CEO, who's called Keith Anderson, he said to me, you know what, we need to look beyond this. This is still very important, even if those big powers, those key players like India, US and China, Australia, haven't signed up yet.
The thing with COP is, I think what we need to look at is get away from thinking it's all about one big, significant, massive announcement. It's about taking it step by step, keep moving forward. And the important thing is to keep moving forward even after COP finishes. What we can't do is have lots of announcements, and then stop, and then wait for another year. We just need to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving.
One breakthrough I'm hearing noise about is hydrogen. Yeah. What's happening?
It's brilliant. So I think hydrogen's a massive future, and the great thing for Scotland is Scotland's probably one of the best placed countries to take a lead in developing hydrogen technology across the world. The importance for hydrogen is there's probably 10 to 15% of the economy that we can't electrify, and therefore hydrogen is the best answer for it. So big dustbin lorries, heavy goods vehicles, big industrial processes like steel fabrication. Hydrogen is a brilliant solution for those and a really, really important part of getting to net zero.
So you've got a solution, but these things take time. They also cost money. To what extent do you think that the energy transition's maybe being derailed a little bit by the energy crisis?
It's not. The important thing is for us to keep focusing and keep driving. The great thing is the UK's put 2050 net zero into legislation. We have the pathway to get there. And the other big important thing is we have all of the technology available to us today to get to net zero. So it's now just about speed, speed, speed. We need to go faster and do more.
OK, so what's stopping you?
So one of the things we need to do, the ambition's brilliant, the targets are brilliant, lots of processes in the country that were designed 10 years ago and they aren't keeping pace with what we need to do. So we need to look at our planning system, we need to look at our regulatory system, we need to look at some of the environmental processes to make sure they can keep pace to allow us to get to net zero.
You're brimming with enthusiasm. Yeah. But how has COP26 been for you so far? Is it turning out as expected, in terms, not just in terms of the atmosphere, but in the connections you're making?
Look, there's a phenomenal buzz around Glasgow. It is brilliant. There's a massive buzz around the COP Centre. And I think people are realising it's not about big, massive announcements. It's about lots of steady progress, lots of good progress, and we're seeing that with the announcements that have come out. The connections are brilliant. It's a great way to meet all the world leaders, to meet politicians, regulators, other companies. Brilliant connections between the finance community, the business community and government, because that's critical to driving forward.
Sounds a little bit like you're trying to manage my expectations here. Don't expect any more big announcements.
Oh, I think there'll be more announcements. I'm sure there are going to be more announcements, but I think the biggest differentiator with COP26, if you compare it to what's happened before, is the finance community are fully bought in and focused. The business community are fully bought in and focused on delivering it. Citizens, people, you see everybody engaged with wanting more renewable energy and tackling climate change. And that is one of the most powerful ways of pushing governments and getting more change.
And that was Keith Anderson speaking with CGTN's Juliette Mann.
More than 250 days of sunshine per year and surrounded by water, Greece is well placed to produce renewable energy on a large scale.
As the country tries to reshape its economy towards green technology, there's hope that Greece could help the European Union meet its goal of abandoning fossil fuels by 2050. Evangelos Tsipsas reports.
From unprecedented amount of rain in Evia to the fires that ravaged hundreds of thousands of hectares of land in ancient Olympia, Greece has suffered a series of extreme weather events since the summer. Scientists blame these events on climate change, but Greece is fighting back. It's pushing for a transition to clean energy and carbon neutrality by producing renewable energy at record levels.
Indeed, the 6th of September was day of records for the Greek renewable sector. 81% of the total clean energy produced in the country was provided by wind. And in total, 60% of the total energy consumed on that day was offered by clean renewable energy sources.
The thumping sound of the giant blades can be heard throughout the hills in northern Evia. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles of underwater cables link Greece's mainland power stations to the country's popular vacation destinations. It allows the islands to ditch their oil-burning generators for renewable power from wind and sun. The country's independent power transmission operator, or IPTO, allows the electrical interconnection of almost all Greek islands. It's part of a $5.7 billion green investment program starting with Greece's largest island of Crete and then moving north towards the Kyklades. The interconnections have already helped oil-fired power plants in Paros, Syros and Mykonos to reduce their CO2 emissions by 30% by simply using more wind energy and less petroleum. But Greece's IPTO is not limited to its borders. It's expanding to neighboring countries as the European Union seeks to take the lead in the race to stop climate change.
If we have grids connecting Greece, not only with the European countries on the north, but also with countries in the south and east, like Cyprus, like Israel, like Egypt, we can make sure that whenever there is an issue of adequacy within our country, we can get energy, import energy from renewable energy sources, for example, that can be installed in Cyprus, in Egypt, in Israel. The same also stands for these countries. They can import energy from us whenever they are in lack of local energy production.
Although many Greeks still seem hesitant over the transition to renewable energy from fossil fuels, this summer's wildfires and extreme weather patterns help drive home the message that climate change is real and it's already here.
Greece is steadily transforming itself into a regional hub for green energy. Our recent agreement with Egypt for a new electricity interconnection is a case in point, and Greece is also the logical entry point for green hydrogen produced in the Middle East and in Northern Africa into the European market.
Although Greece is still struggling to stay on its feet from the devastating decade-long debt crisis, the government continues to adopt a green agenda, meeting its climate goals and helping the EU meet its goal of abandoning fossil fuels by 2050. Evangelos Tsipsas for CGTN, Athens.
Coming up, the end of pandemic support for the world's biggest economy. The Federal Reserve votes to taper off its bond buying program.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
This week on Razor and a COP26 special, monitoring forests using robots, the weakening of a major ocean current, and reaching for the skies.
We need to change the spirit of the people. We can do it. We can change. We get much more power from renewable energy than what we get from fossil fuel.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders are holding vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the climate have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
Welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available for 24 hours a day on Freeview.
The world's largest import fair has opened its doors in Shanghai with a video address from President Xi Jinping. Nearly 3,000 global companies are at the China International Import Expo, now in its 4th year. They'll showcase products and aim to attract buyers from China's huge consumer market. Chen Tong reports.
In his keynote speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping has strengthened China's determination to continue open its door. Well, this year marks China's 20th anniversary of its accession into the World Trade Organization. President Xi said China has made great achievements over the past 20 years. For example, China's GDP has climbed from the 6th place 20 years ago to the 2nd right now. And the country's foreign direct investment has also climbed from some 26th place to the 1st place at the current moment. President Xi has also said China will continue to promote the so-called Silk Road e-commerce as part of the country's efforts to share market opportunities with the rest of the world. And President Xi has also said China will continue to promote the building of the designated cities into the global consumption centers. Take a listen.
China will firmly uphold the common interests of the world. China will take an active part in cooperation within the United Nations, the WTO, the G20, APEC, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other institutions, and promote more discussions on such issues as trade and investment, the digital economy, and green and low-carbon development.
Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the virus prevention measures this year are very strict, and we have to upload negative results from the nucleic tests done within 48 hours to get access into the exhibition center. But that couldn't stop exhibitors' enthusiasm to show their latest products to Chinese consumers. 3,000 companies from 127 countries and regions will be attending the show. And this year, 80% of the Fortune 500 companies and industry giants are actually returning exhibitors, and they are looking forward to get more connected with Chinese consumers at the event.
Chen Tong there, while Spain's fashion giant Inditex runs 400 stores in more than 50 cities across China. The boss of its China operations has been telling CGTN how the company can benefit from the expo.
The most appreciated value of the CII is not only deal making, but also to enjoy an excellent space for global participants to have in-depth exchanges. You know, we got the opportunity of analyzing market trends, but also of knowing deeper our stakeholders and partners' expectations. And that inspired all the Inditex family in China and abroad also, and further strengthened our confidence in the Chinese market.
The US Federal Reserve is to start scaling back its multi-billion-dollar support package for the American economy.
Yes, with inflation rising and consumer demand booming after lockdown, the Fed will taper off its bond buying programme later this month, and it could end entirely by June of next year. Let's go live now to New York and John Terrett. Hi there, John. So what did Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, have to say?
Hello, Paul. Hello, Robin. Listen, I'm going to do something we don't often admit to in this business, OK? I'm going to admit to ripping off another journalist. And you know what? I don't care, because I was listening to NPR, National Public Radio, this morning when I got up, and the journalist on there said it so beautifully that I just have to credit him and pass this on to you so that you understand what's happening. For the last 20 months or so, the Federal Reserve has been acting like a parent trying to teach a child to ride a bike, running alongside them, holding the saddle behind them, and judging when is right to let go so that they can go off on their own. And that is exactly what's been happening, and that's what happened in the last 24 hours or so, because we now have the news that they will begin taking the hand off the saddle a little bit later this month in November, and beginning to wind down the $120 billion of bond buying that's been going on to prop up the US economy. They're going to do it slowly, as you said, Paul. So it'll probably end in the summer of next year, about 9 months away. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, says the time is not right to hike inflation. He says inflation is higher than he wants, more than 2%, but he thinks it'll come down next year as the economy continues to improve. And he says if we raise rates now, then that will certainly curb inflation, tamp down inflation, because that's what raising rates does, but it will also choke off the job market. And the other big part of the Federal Reserve's responsibility is to create maximum employment if possible. And still, right now, even though that hand is coming off the saddle a little bit, it may well go back on at any time, you understand, but it's come off a little bit for now. We're still 5 million jobs down in this economy from where we were last year, and the Fed won't rest, and they won't stop bond buying completely until they've reached as much as they can of full employment here. They'll never get it completely full, but as much as they can. Guys?
I agree. That's a great metaphor, the learning to ride thing. And
it's good.
What did Wall Street think about all this? How's it reacting?
Well, Wall Street kind of knew it was coming. You have to bear that in mind. And I think that Wall Street thinks that the tone of the chairman yesterday was very dovish. He could have been a lot more aggressive, and he wasn't really. I think Wall Street thinks that what he said was reasonable and that the timing is right. I get a lot of people here saying, you know, it's got to end sooner or later. It can't go on forever. It might as well be now. And now it is happening. And proof of that is we had 3 record closes last night on Wall Street. 4, in fact, if you include the Russell 2000, which we don't often mention. And the reason is not difficult to understand. I think you said it more or less in the intro. Company earnings for the third quarter are coming in great. Most of them, 80%, are beating Wall Street expectations. We've got consumer spending and consumer confidence still managing to hold it together. And what you're seeing all around us here in New York and around the country is a sort of normalization beginning now after the COVID-19 period. So that's the reason for the records, although just now at the moment the Dow is down 70 points, but the NASDAQ is up for the 9th day in a row and heading for a 9th close in a row. Finally, just briefly, in Washington, D.C., this was yesterday's topic. Washington, D.C., the Democrats now appear to be moving towards a vote on those 2 infrastructure packages. I think the election results in Virginia and New Jersey really lit a fire under them. They know time is desperately running out. Democrats are running around Washington saying it's time to get things done. And President Biden came home from COP26 and said the time is now. Please do it. So the debate is still intensifying within the Democratic Party, but they seem to be edging towards a vote. We'll see, won't we, in the hours ahead.
We will. Thanks so much, John. John Terrett.
So that was the United States. Here in the UK, the cost of borrowing is to be kept on hold. The Bank of England has decided to keep headline interest rates at their record low of 0.1%. There are fears that rising food and fuel bills are causing a cost of living crisis for many households. Let's talk now to Mark Oswald, who is Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services. Thanks very much indeed for being with us on the programme today. So the Bank of England, of course, widely expected to raise interest rates today, but instead they kept them on hold. So what's it thinking?
Well, I think the first thing to say is the Bank of England is leading everyone a very merry dance. Mr. Bailey's predecessor was called an unreliable boyfriend, and this looks like unreliable boyfriend 2.0. Fundamentally, the Bank of England could have actually not signalled that it was going to hike rates today a couple of weeks ago, because the points that they made, which are basically hindering them, or rather making them cautious about raising rates at the moment, is there's still a very uncertain outlook for the labour market. They're not really quite sure what the impact of the end of the furlough scheme, on which there were still 1 million people at the end of the scheme at the end of September. They're concerned about the weakening consumer demand, and they're also actually quite fully aware that actually hiking interest rates to try and choke off food and energy inflation, which they can do, which will have little impact on that food and energy inflation, is probably not a great tactic, particularly if you don't know what's actually happening with consumer spending, services spending, not particularly encouraging at the moment, and obviously services account for roughly about 80% of the UK economy. So they've stepped back a bit, but they're still basically signalling that there's going to be a rate hike early next year.
Well, let's focus on inflation for a minute. It is, of course, well above the target already, and this risks it spiralling even further, doesn't it? The bank suggested 5%, so that must be a concern for people, surely.
It is going to be a concern, and it is very much as you put it, a cost of living crisis, because all these pressures that we've got in the UK, and indeed in most parts of the world, are in what one would call non-discretionary areas, i.e. the areas which we all have to spend money on: food, energy, housing. Now, the housing part, one could probably blame most of the central banks around the world for creating a lot of asset price inflation. But the food and energy part, there's little that they can do about. And the bank did actually warn that actually there are still considerable upside risks in terms of energy prices. And I couldn't help but concur. Interestingly enough, OPEC Plus today were making the observation that actually the high cost of oil actually has much more to do with the high cost of coal, of natural gas, and it's a spillover or trickle-down effect into the oil market. And that could keep oil prices at a very elevated level, and inflation thereby at a fairly elevated level.
We did see a big fall in sterling when the news came out. Is this a shambles, as one former MPC member called it?
It is a complete and utter shambles. I mean, their credibility was already threadbare before this, but having yet again gone to one of these moments where they've signalled, this happened on the Mark Carney as well, where they've basically signalled, we have to take action. Mr. Bailey tried to backpedal on that. He said, no, it was conditional. No, it wasn't conditional at all. He basically said, we have to take action just 2 weeks ago. And then they take no action. The problem is that it puts a risk premium on UK interest rates and thereby on sterling in the foreign exchange markets, because people don't know which way they're going to jump. They've become unpredictable in an era, we were talking earlier about the Federal Reserve, where this guidance, whether one likes it or not, is an important part of monetary policy, and they're making a total mess of it.
Mark Oswald from ADM Investor Services, great to have you on the programme today. Thanks for joining us.
Eurozone producer prices saw their highest ever rise in September, driven mostly by surging energy costs. In the 19 countries using the currency, prices at factory gates rose 2.7% on the previous month, higher than the 2.2% predicted by analysts, and marking a 16% year-on-year rise. The results are the latest sign of strong inflationary pressures facing the bloc.
The OPEC group of oil exporting countries and its allies have agreed to stick to plans to raise oil output by 400,000 barrels per day. That's despite the United States pressing the group to boost supplies even further to help ease soaring energy costs. Analysts say it will likely mean continued high prices through the end of this year and potentially into 2022.
Chinese oil and gas company Sinopec has agreed the country's largest ever long-term liquefied natural gas contract with an American firm. Venture Global will sell 4 million tonnes of LNG to Sinopec in a deal that its CEO called historic. The agreement is set to double China's imports of US liquid natural gas.
More than 140 million people in China have used a new digital currency service as part of a large-scale trial. Since April, authorities have been allowing members of the public to test a digital version of China's currency, the renminbi. So far, there's been no confirmed date for its official launch.
Coming up on CGTN, a British Member of Parliament resigns after a row over his conduct led to a government U-turn.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
Safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Day 4 of the UN Climate Conference as countries look to accelerate the transition to clean energy.
The world's largest import fair has opened in Shanghai with thousands of global companies looking to sell their products to the Chinese market.
The UK keeps interest rates on hold over fears of a cost of living crisis.
Back to our top story now, the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow and the promise by many countries to phase out coal. It's the world's most used fossil fuel and still powers more than 35% of electricity on the planet. Joan McNaughton is chair of the Climate Group and is at COP26. She told me that while it's a positive step, the promises to end its use are just a part of the jigsaw.
This is the decade when we really have to act to reduce emissions significantly if we're going to keep the goal of 1.5 degree limit to global warming in view. Now, history shows that globally, since Paris and even before then, we make commitments and actually we then raise our ambitions afterwards. So I think that's important, and I think that's going to be one of the messages from this COP, is that we must keep monitoring where we are and where we could be. From the Climate Group perspective, we work with subnational governments and businesses, and one example of increased ambition and outperformance is Scotland, where we are now for the COP. The Scottish Government committed to reduce its emissions by 42% by 2020, and it actually reached that goal early in 2014. In fact, it outperformed. It reduced emissions by 45%, and that's given them confidence to set a goal for net zero in Scotland of 2045.
Now, many countries and regions are grappling with an energy crisis over supplies and prices. How much is that impeding efforts, do you think, to move towards greener energy sources?
What we mustn't do is take the wrong lessons from the energy supply issues we're confronting at the moment. The lesson that we should slow down the transition to clean energy will be a big mistake. We've made terrific progress on renewables, and the costs have come down, the technologies are improving all the time. Perhaps what hasn't kept up with the progress of renewables have been the incentives and policy changes that governments need to make to change the system to allow renewables to operate to everyone's satisfaction. So they should be putting more emphasis on storage, they should be putting more emphasis on the flexibility of the electricity system, but the wrong lesson would be to lock in more emissions from fossil fuels and make the countries subject to that incredible volatility of fossil fuel prices, which is rightly a concern at the moment.
You've worked with governments and businesses across your career, and this is not your first COP to attend. What's your gut sense of how this one has gone?
The key thing I think I'd like to see from this COP, which hasn't yet been landed, is that we finish the rule book for Paris. So what is called Article 6, which will enable a price to be put on carbon worldwide, trading in carbon, and for the money to flow to where it can have most impact soonest, because that's the economically rational thing to do. We've got so much to do in such a short time that we have to maximise the impact of everything we're doing. But that's one of the big changes from a few years ago, is just how many investors are putting a premium now on emissions reduction, and that's sending a key signal to business about what they need to do to get their own house in order.
The Chinese coastal city of Zhuhai is used to getting its fair share of extreme weather, including flooding and regular typhoons. Officials there have been working to make the city more resilient, using the idea of nature-based solutions that first originated in Europe. Cao Bing reports.
Sunshine beaches and palm trees. Zhuhai on the south coast of China is a popular tourism spot. Moreover, it's been able to keep damage caused by summer typhoons to a minimum and recover quickly.
This is one of the most popular coastlines in Zhuhai. It is definitely a great place to take a walk or have some fun. As you take a look on my left, it is covered with rocks, and on my right, a golden beach.
These rocks have been piled up to break the waves. Rocks like this have been spread out along the coast to create what's called a resilient city that can withstand typhoons and other shocks.
The flooding we found is really from the storm surge. So we build up those kind of rock, can displace the wave energy. And also it created, we call the micro habitat.
The concept of utilizing nature rather than building great infrastructure to solve city problems is called nature-based solutions. It was first developed in the 1980s in Europe and was introduced to Zhuhai through a platform called Europe-China Eco-City Link, or EC Link, which aims to introduce European experiences to China to battle against climate change and achieve a low-carbon society. The creation of beaches and seashore gardens is also based on that idea.
Zhuhai's coast didn't have a beach or sand. It was just but rocks and mud. The beautiful scenery was all created with sand replenishment. And the beach can also serve as a buffer zone to reduce strong wave energy on stormy days.
He says the beaches are just one part of the whole set of the measures.
You can see the traffic lanes are a bit higher than the beach. and the residential community is the highest. Together, they make up the 3 lines of defense to respond to different levels of storms and typhoons.
Experts say this cooperation with Europe in building a resilient city has proved to be effective.
EC Link gave the Zhuhai a totally new concept for cities development. We are catching up, and we have some more innovations.
Shenian says cooperation has also raised awareness about preventing future natural risks, and that is what matters the most. Cao Bing, CGTN, Zhuhai, Guangdong Province.
The UK's Brexit negotiator has held talks in Paris to try and resolve the fishing dispute with France after weeks of tension.
It comes as the detained British vessel at the centre of a row arrived back in the UK after being released by French authorities. Earlier, President Emmanuel Macron suspended trade sanctions against Britain to allow more room for discussion.
Let's talk now to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. So, Ross, what have the two sides been talking about?
Oh, Robin, those trade sanctions were suspended by President Macron on Monday, and it does look as though the UK says today that it feels it's unlikely that they will come back into play. France had threatened to bar British boats from landing their catch in French ports and potentially tighten road traffic coming into the European Union from Britain. But what we are getting from the UK side is that they feel that as a result of the talks that have taken place today, those threats will not come back onto the table. And the talks that took place this morning here in Paris, Clement Beaune, the French Europe Minister, David Frost, the British Brexit Minister, trying to find a resolution to the dispute over fishing rights. Well, they didn't come across that resolution. They are going to have more talks early next week. They're trying to find alignment on the licences that French vessels require to continue to be able to fish in British waters and vice versa, British trawlers coming into EU waters. That is what, Paul, you were talking about in the introduction, that trawler from the UK, which did have a licence to fish in EU waters, but did not have that licence put on a list the UK government supplied to the EU. So when that trawler crossed into EU waters, despite having the licence, that licence wasn't on the list, and so it was impounded in the port of Le Havre in northern France. And yesterday we did get clearance that trawler is going to be able to leave, as you mentioned. So it's all about which boats can fish where, based on what they used to be able to do. Since 1973, when the UK joined the European Union, French boats have been able to go into what were EU waters when Britain was a member. It's very important for Danish boats and Dutch boats to be able to fish in British waters as well. UK boats do go into EU waters to try to land some of their catch from EU waters. So the boats are regularly crossing between waters, and so that's what needs to be ironed out. They need to find alignment, the UK and France and the wider EU as well, on how to ensure that as many boats as possible do have their licences approved. France says the UK has been reluctant to approve licences, has been slow to do so, demanding lots of paperwork. The UK says it has approved nearly all the applications that it has received. So David Frost and Clement Beaune from the UK and France going to be meeting for more talks next week. Tomorrow, David Frost goes to Brussels, where he's going to see Maroš Šefčovič, and he is the co-chair of the EU-UK Joint Partnership Council. The two men are going to be speaking about wider Brexit issues, so not just fishing, also topics like the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thanks very much.
A British Member of Parliament in the middle of a sleaze scandal has resigned. Conservative lawmaker Owen Paterson had been found guilty by an independent regulator of abusing his position to promote companies that were paying him as a consultant. On Wednesday, his colleagues voted to ignore the verdict, but within 24 hours, they'd U-turned. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
The process of fair. Guilty, according to an independent regulator. And yet on Wednesday, MPs voted to put their colleague Owen Paterson's recommended suspension from Parliament on hold.
The ayes to the right, 250. The noes to the left, 232.
And instead put the standards watchdog itself in the dock, to cries of shame from opposition parties. In the build-up to that moment, they had voiced outrage at the possibility.
In no other profession in our country Could someone be found guilty by an independent process and just have their mates vote them back into the job? Surely the Prime Minister and his government are not going to do that today.
Paterson's Conservative Party, led by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, though, argued his case had brought simmering concerns about the whole disciplinary process to a head.
Or whether as a matter of natural justice, our procedures in this House allow for proper appeal, Mr. Speaker.
The ex-minister for Northern Ireland was judged to have repeatedly misused his position to promote two companies for whom he was a paid consultant. Paterson himself had complained that witnesses who'd offered to back him weren't approached, and says the stress of the process played a major role in his wife's suicide last year. Still, such was the backlash that on Thursday morning the government backed down.
While there is a very strong feeling on both sides of the House that there is a need for an appeals process, there is equally a strong feeling that this should not be based on a single case or applied retrospectively.
And that same afternoon, the man who'd once stood alongside US Secretaries of State announced he'd be leaving politics for good. Guy Henderson, CGTN.
African and Western nations are repeating calls for an immediate ceasefire in Ethiopia as forces from the northern Tigray region advance towards the capital. The US Embassy in Addis Ababa is allowing the departure of staff and family members over concerns of escalating violence. Our correspondent Girum Chala has more.
It is exactly a year since fighting broke out between government force and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Since then, thousands of lives have been lost, with millions remaining under humanitarian support. Now the conflict has taken a new turn. TPLF forces have reportedly taken control of the two strategic towns of Dese and Kombolcha. Having joined forces with the Oromo Liberation Army, they are now contemplating marching on the capital, Addis Ababa. Ethiopian National Defense Force says they are repelling attacks with the help of a local militia group and that they have recaptured some areas. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has called on citizens to take up arms and fight to defend the sovereignty of the country. A nationwide state of emergency is now in effect as well. In response to the escalation, the United Nations, the European Union and the United States have all called for an end to the war and for peaceful dialogue. In a statement, the EU said it reiterates that there is no military solution and it calls on all parties to the conflict to implement a meaningful ceasefire with immediate effect and engage in political negotiations without preconditions, showing responsibility and political leadership. The United States, meanwhile, has sent a high-level delegation to Addis Ababa to try to facilitate an end to the fighting. Girum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have joined calls for the military coup in Sudan to be overturned. The two countries have issued a statement along with the United States and the UK calling for those arrested to be released and for a return to civilian government. Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok has been under house arrest since being ousted on the 25th of October.
Iran has agreed to resume talks with world powers aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. Discussions are set to take place in Vienna at the end of the month. The pact has eroded since 2018 when Donald Trump pulled the United States out and reimposed sanctions on Iran, prompting Tehran to breach various limits on uranium enrichment.
Residents on the Spanish Canary island of La Palma have been ordered to stay indoors. This after the biggest eruption so far on the Cumbre Vieja volcano. Thick clouds of ash have led to the suspension of all flights into the island. Tourists who've travelled to see the lava flows are facing long waits at ferry terminals as conditions worsen. The volcano has been erupting since September the 19th.
Germany has recorded almost 34,000 COVID cases in the past 24 hours, its biggest daily increase since the start of the pandemic. However, the number of people in intensive care remains lower than it was earlier this year. It's thought that around 16 million Germans have yet to be vaccinated.
And the UK has become the first country in the world to approve a pill to treat COVID-19. The antiviral tablet developed by American pharmaceutical giant Merck was originally designed to treat the flu, but in clinical trials it has been shown to halve the risk of hospitalisation or death for people with mild to moderate coronavirus symptoms. The head of the European Parliament delegation says it's high time the EU steps up cooperation with Taiwan.
More than a dozen parliamentarians met Taiwan's leader Tsai Ing-wen during a three-day visit there, a move firmly opposed by China.
The European Parliament is an important official institution of the European Union. Its members should fully understand the complexity and sensitivity of the Taiwan issue, abide by the EU's commitment to the One China principle, carefully and properly handle Taiwan-related issues, and maintain the political foundation for the development of China-EU relations. China urges the European side to correct its mistakes and refrain from sending any wrong signals to the separatist forces for Taiwan independence, so as not to cause a serious impact on China-EU relations.
Stay with us. Coming up, digging deep underground at the world's largest indoor rainforest to tap into new sources of power.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. More than 40% of Britain's electricity now comes from renewable sources, such as wind turbines and solar panels. But the UK lags behind some other nations when it comes to one natural power source, geothermal energy.
Michael Voss has been to Cornwall in southwest England, where one of the area's biggest tourist attractions is hoping to harness the power of underground heat.
The Eden Project's huge geodesic domes are in effect a giant greenhouse, home to the world's largest indoor rainforest. Thousands of exotic tropical trees and plants cover an area the size of 3 football pitches, which pre-COVID attracted more than 1 million visitors a year.
It takes an awful lot of energy to keep this indoor rainforest hot and humid, with temperatures up to 35 degrees. So the Eden Project has decided to commission one of the country's first geothermal units.
The company has raised around $20 million to build the power plant.
There's all sorts of renewable technology. Geothermal is baseload, so really important that it's on basically all of the time, whereas solar and wind, which are great technologies, don't get me wrong, but you know, the sun has to shine and the wind has to blow, and we've got little bits of those here. The other thing about it is it's an incredibly small footprint, geothermal.
Drilling is now underway just a short distance from the domes, boring down through the tough granite rock to access the Earth's natural heat deep underground.
A geothermal project is where you drill down into the earth to find heat and permeability. You drill down 4.5 km, where it'll be about 180, 190 degrees C. Cold water goes down that hole, you drill another hole, hot water comes up that hole, and then you make electricity and direct heating from the source.
They've almost reached the target depth of 4.5 kilometres underground. It will take another year, though, before the entire project is up and running. The UK does have substantial wind and solar facilities, and the government's announced some $360 million in new subsidies to encourage further wind, solar and tidal energy projects. But geothermal is not included, and Britain is lagging behind several other European countries, where around 140 deep geothermal power plants are already in operation.
It is expensive to start off with in a new geology, but as soon as you start practicing in that geology, the costs will come down. And in Paris, where there are 40 different heat projects, it's as cheap as gas.
Once it is operational, the system should provide enough power and heat for the Eden project, as well as up to 7,000 nearby homes. The hope is that if successful, it could pave the way for deep geothermal to play a greater role in the UK's energy needs. Michael Voss, CGTN, Cornwall.
As we've been reporting, China's biggest import expo is underway in Shanghai. Hundreds of Italian companies are among the many businesses there looking to court Chinese consumers.
Hermione Kitson has been speaking to a family-run jewellery firm, which is taking part for a 4th year.
From the Gulf of Naples in the seaside town of Torre di Greco, a family business has crafted its style through generations, transforming seashells into fine jewellery.
I'm here now with the owner of the company, Gino Di Luca. Please tell me, why is your brand unique?
Our brand is Cameo Italiano, and we do cameo jewelry. Our cameos are made out of seashells, so each one seashell is different, and we turn it into a jewelry of very high artistic and artisanal contents.
China is emerging as one of the company's biggest markets, with a potential of more than 60% of exports. In April this year, they opened a base in Shanghai.
The CIIE is for us the ideal platform where we go and showcase our very special products, and from there we can feel the energy and the vitality of the China market.
This year will be Cameo Italiano's 4th consecutive year at the event, which has been the key to its success there.
And this is a special piece that we've been working at for almost 1 year.
It's one of hundreds of Italian brands hoping to export not just a product to China, but a culture and heritage.
It's a very intricate and delicate process. There's no room for mistake. There's no room for error. And it's a process also of interpretation.
They employ 40 master carvers, most of whom were born into the trade.
And this very layered story is catching the attention of all of our Chinese friends. And this is telling us how much potential we have with the China market.
Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Naples.
A New Zealand couple claim to have roasted the record books with the world's biggest ever potato.
That's right, the giant spud, seen here being cradled like a newborn, is named Doug. Naturally, weighing in at 7.8 kilograms, Doug is roughly the same as a couple of bags of regular potatoes or a small dog. Doug's impressive size means he beats the previous record by nearly 3 kilograms.
Delicious.
Yes, well, nearly time for us to say tatty bye, but our top stories again. Day 4 of the UN Climate Conference looks at accelerating the transition to clean energy with a focus on fossil fuels and how to ditch them.
Courting China's consumers, the world's largest import fair opens in Shanghai as thousands of global companies show off their wares.
And key talks wrap up in Paris without a resolution to the post-Brexit fishing dispute between the UK and France.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview. Up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.